Today, also representing nations and other political entities, flags are used to represent youth groups, athletic competitions, and international bodies. When we first read this, we might immediately detect that something seems off with A. But before we look at A more closely, let's just look at B, C, and D and make sure that there's no other more, pressing error or more obvious error that fits into the categories we've looked at. So let's see. Also representing nations and other political entities. Doesn't seem anything wrong with that. Flags are used to represent youth groups. This is passive voice, but again, passive voice is not always wrong on the SAT. And if we thought it was wrong, we'd have to say, well, what would we fix it to? And it's not clear because we don't have a subject here. We don't know who uses these. I guess these groups use them. But in any event, so yeah, passive voice, even though that's passive, we can pretty much let it go in this time. Flags are used to represent, no problem with that. So let's go back to A. It sounds wrong, and indeed this is an idiom error. And the question is, what would we change this to? Well, let's see. Today, also representing nations and other political entities, flags are used. So we want to say not also, but instead in addition to. And that would be the idiomatic phrase we'd want to use in this situation. And again, there's no rule that tells you that that's the case. It's just that's how English works in this particular scenario. So we would pick A because it is an idiom, but just be careful with idioms. Why I wanted to go over the others first is just to make sure, a lot of times we'll see something that we think may be wrong, so we'll call it an idiom, but you just really need to be careful with that because sometimes idiom can be the kind of catch-all category that we use to pick anything we want. So if you think there's an idiom error, as always, check all 5 choices, or in this case, the other 3 choices, because you want to make sure that, there's no subject-verb agreement in the sentence or pronoun agreement, right? Some other actual rule that we see quite a bit in these questions. And if there's nothing in B, C, and D, and you're really confident that A is an idiom error, then you go with A. But just be very careful with idioms because sometimes they can be used to make excuses for certain choices when maybe that's not appropriate. So this one is A.